I don't really remember it that well now. It's been so long. It's been over 6 years. But the one thing that I do remember is I remember it felt amazing to go back to work.
Hello and welcome to the Dad Dialogue Podcast, the show where we talk about the successes and the stresses of becoming a dad and being a dad. I am your host, Lawrence. Thank you so much for being with us today. Quick reminder, you can go over to daddialogue.co.uk if you would like to sign up to be a future guest on a future episode. I would really love to hear from you, always looking to get new guests on the show, so please do reach out. Joining me today is James Gomes. James is based in America. He's a former teacher. He's the dad to a 6-year-old girl. He has spent some time previously as a stay-at-home dad, so we have a little bit of a chat about that. James also has a really interesting approach to working, and he had a quite funny story to share about what his work looked like when his daughter did arrive. We talk about the flexibility of having a partner that is in quite a well-paying job, what that looks like for a family, and how we're able to take some steps towards flexibility in that and impacting our children in a positive way, using that to the benefit. He also told me that they're not opposed to family, which was an interesting perspective, so do look forward to hearing the discussion about that. He also shared a love of reading and a love of teaching his daughter reading, so we discussed that for a while. That's a big part of my belief as well, is teaching a love of reading to our children, so that was a big part of our conversation as well. Really interesting approach to fatherhood from James, really interesting discussion. I really hope you enjoy it. Let's get into the conversation. So James, thank you so much for joining us on the Dad Dialogue podcast today. Can we just start off by you telling our listeners just a little bit about yourself and your family?
Yeah, so my family is 3. My daughter is about 6.5. She's in first grade. And my wife and I have been together, I have to do the math really quick, but right around 12 years. And we got married shortly before my daughter was born. Okay. I am stay-at-home dad, kind of, maybe. We recently moved, so I'm in between. We literally just moved into our house last month, so I'm still kind of fixing up things around the house randomly. And the house is pretty close to being done, so now I'm at that point where I'm going to start thinking about what's next. Right now, I'm maybe thinking of something part-time or maybe starting my own small business. Originally, I was a teacher. I taught for about 5 years as a classroom teacher in the U.S. The last few years, I've been tutoring and subbing and working part-time at a private school just to supplement some income and primarily pay for daycare, because I couldn't hack it as a complete stay-at-home with my child dad.
Okay. Can we get into that for a minute? Because I'm a stay-at-home dad myself, also used to be a teacher, but I think it's a really interesting topic. And so, yeah, can you tell us a little bit, how long did you do it for, and what was the factor that kind of made you decide to put your daughter in daycare?
Okay, so this we had moved. So my wife is a medical doctor. She just finished her residency. So we had moved so I was teaching full time. She was a medical student, and then we moved to do her residency. So the original plan was I would stay at home and watch our daughter, who was about 2 at that time.
Okay.
And so there's a combination of factors that were kind of going against me. For one, we literally just moved someplace, so I had no friends there. Our closest family was about a 5-hour drive, so family was kind of off the table as well. And so for me, it was me and my daughter just alone all day. I didn't really have a community. It was 2020, so this was pandemic, so there wasn't a whole lot of social, I think the library had some things. So like maybe we went to book readings, but it was like everyone's wearing masks and everyone's staying 6 feet away. And I made it about probably 5 months, and there were a couple incidences I had with my daughter. Where I completely lost my cool. Like I lost my patience. I'm like screaming at a 2-year-old, and so that happened about twice. And I just realized, like, I can't do it. Like I need to go to work. She needs friends. She needs like socialization she wasn't getting. And my wife was just working so much that she just wasn't around very much. So sometimes
Mm.
she would work 12 days and she would work 12 straight days sometimes. So
Jeez.
imagine someone that's working like 100 hours a week, 12
Mm.
12 straight days in a row, and you're just with a 2-year old. And like I said,
Mm.
I couldn't do it. And so we put her in daycare, you know, for me and her both.
Mm.
And it was a very good move, I think, for everyone in the
Yeah.
family.
No, I appreciate you sharing that because I think it's a really important part of these decisions that we make as parents is that we can have the best intentions and then kind of course correcting when something isn't going right is such a important thing. And like being able to kind of what's the way to put it? Being like not being prideful and like understanding is like, you know what, like I tried this, it hasn't worked. The best thing for our family would be to change our course and register at daycare. How did you feel like kind of going into that? How what was your kind of mental state as you made that decision? Do you remember?
I maybe I can't give you a real great answer. I don't think I had any hesitation about it.
Okay.
She had been in daycare for maybe 2 or 3 months at for there was a time when I was teaching and my wife had a bunch of obligations for school. So we kind of had to put her in for she but yeah, it was really short. She was about like probably 1 and some change months, and
Mm.
she was there for 2 or 3 months. So maybe I was a little concerned with her. She was really shy. I If my memory serves me right, she didn't even talk to her teachers the first time for like a couple months. They never heard her
Mm.
talk, even though she was, for her age, she was quite talkative. And
Mm.
so, yeah, I mean, maybe I felt a little bad like the first day or two because she didn't want to go. But the teachers at the daycare were just so good. A lot of them
Mm.
have been there for over a decade. A couple of the teachers
Wow.
went there as as children. Like they went to
No
daycare
way.
there as a kid. So it was like
Wow.
small time. There was no cameras. It wasn't, there was no app to watch your kids on. There were no screens in the building. It was very old school. And pretty much, I mean, you just have some adults just supervising kids who are kind of
Mm.
playing together and engaging together. They did follow like a pre-K-ish curriculum, not really strict, but like the kids were doing stuff. They weren't just there playing with
Yeah.
toys the whole time.
Yeah. No, that's cool. And I think I have no experience of like putting my kids in daycare. Before we moved here, we had when we used to live in Hong Kong before moving to the Netherlands, and we had a live-in nanny because that's just how things go there. Like, it's pretty much the only form of childcare you can get. So neither of our kids have had any form of daycare until my oldest one started like a preschool program. So that was our first experience of something like that. And it's good that you had that positive experience of positive teachers and just a positive response and like kind of like knowing that, this is the best choice for her. This is going to be a good thing for her. And the reason I kind of want to spend a bit of time on this topic is, as I said, I think it can sometimes feel from the outside, at least, if people haven't done the stay at home thing, like it can often seem like such a, I don't know, easy thing that some people think. Like I'll often tell people that I'm a stay at home parent and they will, the way that they view it can vary drastically, whether based on their own experiences, whether it be from their parents or from friends of theirs or whatever it might be. And people seem to think it's either like a walk in the park or they think you're like doing this huge sacrifice and you don't get any time to yourself. And, it's just every story is unique and every story is different. And that's why it's so important to have like an understanding that it might work for some time. Like I've spoken to other dads on this podcast actually that have said they did it for like 6 months and they were really pleased they did it for 6 months. It went well, but they just wanted a bit more out of life. And the way that they could provide the best for their family is to get that bit more by going back to work and putting the child in daycare or whatever it might be. So no, I appreciate you sharing with that. So you've recently moved, said about a month. How is your daughter at 6 years old? How is she kind of settling into the new place?
So I had the same kind of concern. Like I said, she's typically shy. When
Mm.
I would take her to parks, she would run away when other kids would talk to her. Like this is like 2 and 3 years old. Like she didn't want any,
Yeah.
like she was real curious. She would kind of watch the other people play. She was very, very curious about what they were doing. But then if they came and talked to her, she would like come and run and like hide behind me. So, I mean, just really, really
Yeah.
shy. And so she had a pretty close group of friends from the daycare, and some of them went to her same kindergarten class. So we were a little concerned about her starting a new school. We moved from the state of New York to the state of Arizona. And for anyone
Mm.
that's not familiar with the US, that's probably like 3 to 4,000 kilometer distance. And so we
Mm.
slowly traveled across the US, and we went to playgrounds, and she just made friends with people a couple times. And so right off the bat, I knew, I was like, okay, she's ready. Like this is fine.
Mm.
For her starting school, she didn't give us a single hard problem about it. I don't think she realized it
Wow.
was optional. It was just like school was just so ingrained. And
Mm.
and I also front loaded it because I was a little bit concerned. So I was, always, hey, you're going to be starting this new school. It's going to be so I was
Mm.
definitely giving her a lot of positive ideas to go with it.
Mm.
And so she transitioned extremely well. I mean, I think it also goes to the fact that just kids are resilient.
Yeah, for sure. And I like what you said, giving her positive ideas, because I think we as parents can often maybe ask a lot of questions and show our concern by seeking to find information. But obviously, when they're kids, they don't really have a huge amount of information, and we can obviously help shape their understanding of like what a new challenge can involve and the positives that we can take, and like you said, the resilience and the bravery that we can build, and these great skills that we can get. So yeah, that's really cool. I'm glad she's settling, because I'm sure that age it's not always. Yeah, it's just a big concern I'm sure people would have. So we spoke a little bit about new fathers, and before we started filming, we spoke a little bit about the feelings that a new dad would have, and I know you have a certain aspect of it. So I'm wondering if you can think back to when your daughter was a newborn, and are there any moments that kind of stand out from that period? Because I read that you said that it felt amazing to go back to work, and that it was good to have that change of environment. Can you just tell us a little bit more about that?
Sure. I I was starting a new job at the time, so that I only
Right.
got, and it was a seasonal job. So I had quit teaching, and I decided I wanted to be a park ranger, and so I did a couple of seasons as a national park ranger in the U.S. And
Cool.
so it's kind of like a part time job. Like there's no benefits. The pay was really low. I wasn't doing it to make
Mm.
money, and my wife unexpectedly, or we weren't married at the time, but my wife unexpectedly got pregnant. So this is the long story. She had an IUD. She was in medical school, and so it just kind of changed everything. So anyways, I already had this job lined up, so
Mm.
I took it to work this season. My daughter was born maybe a week after I started. So I was
Right.
given maybe 7 days off from work.
Mm.
And yeah, I mean, just those first 7 days were, you know, I don't really remember it that well now. It's been so long. It's been over 6 years.
Yeah.
But the one thing that I do remember is I remember it felt amazing to go back to work. Um, just the constant cycle of, the baby needs to be fed and changed every two
Mm.
hours, trying to squeeze in time to sleep, like naps in sleep. And my daughter was in the ICU for, it was a very short time. It might have been 36 hours. But yeah, so
Right.
it was just a lot. And then going to work, I was working, it's even a little fuzzy now. Maybe I was doing 4 10s or 5 8 hour shifts, but it took me about an hour to drive to work because we were in the New York area. I worked at the Statue of Liberty.
Oh wow.
Was my, yeah. But anyways, so it would take me over an hour to get there. It'd take me over an
Mm.
hour to get back. I had to ride a ferry to get to the island,
Mm.
and just being in the car and being on the ferry and just being able to like listen to a podcast or a book or
Mm.
read while I was on the ferry for about 20 minutes. It's just kind of nice to have that break.
Yeah.
And I did feel bad because my wife did not have that break. My wife was
Mm.
home all day. Um, sometimes when I got home, I could tell she needed a break. You didn't
Yeah.
have to ask her. It was just very obvious. And so it would, yeah, that's what I remember.
Mm. I appreciate kind of hearing that from you, because I think almost every dad goes through that same process and kind of goes through that whole guilt of like, am I allowed to enjoy this? And like, you kind of look back on that time now, like 6 years later, and like, that's the overwhelming memory that you have from that experience. But that doesn't make you like a bad dad or like a negligent dad or like a bad husband or anything. Like, I think that's a very human response and a very natural response. And yeah, like the idea of actually just being able to switch off and like engage in something different. It was definitely the same for me with both my kids, because my wife would stay home. Like, we worked at the same school, but she only got, I think it was about 10 or 11 weeks time off. In Hong Kong, it's very low. So yeah, I would be going back to a school, and just like I took public transport to get there, and yeah, like those trips just became so peaceful because there's just nothing to do. Like, there's no responsibility. Like, even to have the option of like, oh, I don't even like, I can put something in my ears, like I can listen to stuff without having to listen out and be responsible and be involved in that cycle, like you said, of the changing and the napping and the and this, that, and the other, feeding. And I think a lot of dads do go through that, but they kind of don't want to admit that they do enjoy that return to work. Um, and I think once we can appreciate that that's such a big thing and such a great thing for us, like then we can kind of like step up and be like, okay, I need to make sure that I'm allowing my wife some form of similar break, whatever that might look like a real break away where they can spend time listening to something or whatever it might be. So yeah, I think that's super important.
I have another idea. I'm curious your response. So this was something that, so I have to admit, this is not exactly how I feel, but I can relate firsthand to it. But then I also can relate, I think, with some of the people that I know closest who are fathers. But I think there's a little bit of a group think dynamic going on. And it's
Yeah,
this idea that parenthood has to be the greatest part of your life.
oh
And
yeah, yeah.
I think it's very common that I'll say a lot, not to mean like 50% or like I have no idea. Maybe it's 10%, but 10% of dads is still a lot. So like a significant number of dads do not think parenthood is the most awesome thing that has ever happened to them.
Mm,
And I think there is and this is when the group think comes in, because there's a social stigma, or at least, or maybe it's inward. No one wants to admit that they don't think parenthood is awesome, because then
mm,
everyone's going to, oh, that person's a terrible dad, or he's an asshole, or
mm,
whatever. So I think there is that stigma, and people aren't as open and honest about how they feel about being a dad. And so for that reason, I'm typically more negative about parenthood, just because I kind of want to push back against that social stereotype. But what would you think about my theory about this group think idea going on?
I do agree with it for sure, and I think yes, because quite a lot of the time, any group of parents, like when you talk like about a group thing, you kind of like dads maybe getting on a similar page. I'm a part of a dad's WhatsApp group here in the Netherlands. Like, there's a few hundred of us, so we have like weekly meetups with the kids and stuff. And yeah, like you obviously start to values and things start to become similar because you spend a lot of time with them. So I think any parent that is choosing to spend extra time with other parents is going to kind of end up at the place that you're kind of talking about, with it being such a big thing and kind of um, impositioning themselves and having like self-sacrifice and thinking like, oh, I have to sacrifice to self so much to ensure that my kids are getting everything they need from their dad. Um, the thing that I find really important, like we've said this, like my kids are 3 and 1. We try and say this to like the older one a little bit. No matter how much we love him, my wife and I love each other more, and like that's always going to be true. Like, that doesn't matter what he does, and our relationship is more important than our relationship with him, because he's going to grow up and he's going to eventually, move out and have a life of his own. But, our marriage is so important and that's going to be forever. So we try our best to kind of make sure their expectations are going to be like adequate so that when they grow up, they actually understand what it means to kind of like find someone and call them a partner. But I would definitely agree that if you were to say to someone that parenthood wasn't the most important thing to you, you would kind of like get some pushback. And I think if you had a bit of nuance to it and just understanding, like, I feel like I have to grieve this part of my old life. I have to grieve the part of me that could, on a whim, go on a trip to this other place whenever I wanted to. Like that was a part of my life, and like that was an important part of me. But now I have to grieve it, and like it's because of this child. It doesn't mean I resent them, but this is just a part of like the process of becoming a parent. And I think so many parents do go through that, but maybe they don't want to talk about that, and they don't want to be the one to say, "Oh, I didn't care for my child," or "I didn't love my child," or whatever. There's actually a kind of heart behind part of this podcast, and I've never said this actually before, but as we're talking about this topic, I've already told you that the last question is going to be kind of looking back and asking like what advice you give to yourself before your baby was born. And I always ask dads this question because the advice that I'd give to myself, which I needed to hear so much, is that your feelings aren't that important, if that makes sense. Like, I'm not a therapist. I know that therapists would always say that your feelings are important and every feeling is important. You have to honor every single feeling, which I understand. But as a new father, you have to make decisions and you have to respond to things kind of irrespective of your feelings. Like, you can't let your feelings dictate everything. So like, if you feel unloved by a newborn, for example, oh, this baby is only connecting with the mother. Well, they're like, yeah, unsurprisingly so, the baby's only connected with the mother. The baby's been in the mother's womb for 9 months and the mother has the breast milk. Like, the baby's only going to connect with the mother, and every time you pick it up, it might scream all the time. And that's just part of life, and you kind of have to like get on with it. You might not be getting love and affection from your wife because she's just gone through this like incredibly arduous process of bringing a human into this world. You kind of have to get over yourself and understand that like this period might just look a little bit different. And whilst these feelings are coming up, you can't let them dictate the actions that you then take. And that's what I would have always like, told myself, because I got like really caught in like some vicious cycles of like mental gymnastics of analyzing situations and like viewing them in a very vicious way. I think like never actually like bringing them up or anything, but like getting really caught in my head, if that makes sense. So that's why when I've read about your opinions of feelings as a part of new fatherhood, and that's why I really connected with it, because that's what I kind of went through as a new father.
Yeah, in the blog post that you're referring to, I had two friends that asked for parenting advice, really maybe within like a week or two. And so at the time, my number one parenting advice is don't take parenting advice. Like that's like probably my number one advice. I think parenting advice, especially unsolicited parenting advice, I think is mostly bad. But yeah, I think it's okay. I would say I would want to validate whatever feelings the father is having is like completely normal, unless you're one of those very few people like on the far wide end of the distribution that is maybe some type of sociopath or something. But for everyone else, like whatever you're feeling is fine. And kind of to piggyback on what you're saying, it's really, yeah, you're okay. We could say your feelings are important. They're not the most important thing, obviously. If you have a family unit, the most important thing is the child, and maybe even even your wife or the baby's mother is probably more important than your feelings as well. So like the hierarchy, like your feelings are going to be a little lower on that hierarchy for sure.
Yeah, and that's totally what I agree with. And it took me so long to kind of understand that, and it wouldn't be a case of I'd be able to kind of bring it up too much, but it would be really a difficult thing to swallow. And I maybe didn't have the outlets that I needed to kind of connect with people to kind of like understand that a little bit more. But I totally agree with you in terms of advice. Like, this podcast is not
meant to be parenting advice. Like, I don't come on here to tell you how to raise your daughter. You're not telling me how to raise my kids. We're not telling anyone how to raise their kids. We're just sharing our opinions and our stories. And I think the more stories that you can hear, and the more things you can kind of get into your brain, it helps you in those little moments of like, oh, I spoke to James and I know that he did this for his daughter when he moved, and oh, we're going through a similar thing, and I think my kids might respond similarly. So, I'm going to try that. And it's just because I have that voice going around, and I have the voices of every guest that's been on this podcast, and that's why like the podcast is for. Like, I definitely agree that if anyone gets on a podcast and just starts giving you advice of what to do for your kid, I don't see the value in that hugely.
And just the variability of people, kids.
Yes.
It's funny how some of the parenting books are just the credentials is mother of 5. It's like, okay, like who knows how many things are contributing to her so-called success, personality, genes, wealth. I mean, like, who knows? Obviously not. There's so many different ways to raise a child, and I don't know, to focus on one person's or a couple people's anecdotes.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And that's why like anecdotal things I think are really useful in terms of a story aspect and talking about things like, like, if you've mother of 5 that has done this, that, and the other, like, I'm sure many people would like to hear her stories and kind of engage with her life. But it's very different if you start saying like, my research shows that this is the best thing to do for a 7-year-old when they do this. It's like, yeah, like you really need to back that up. And there's a couple of parenting books that I do agree with quite a lot, but like there's not a huge amount. And I think they make them, a good parenting book makes it so very clear to you what the amount of research they've done into it is, and like how they've kind of rolled out their advice in different stages. And they almost have like done their self-evaluation through many times and many editions of the book. So yeah, I agree that we have to be, there's so much out there, so you have to really think about where you want to spend your time, because that's super important. As a parent, we don't have endless time.
If someone is looking for advice, then I think whatever, look and take advice. Like if you're looking and you hear something that sounds good, try it out. And if it doesn't work, like try something else.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I think like if you are having a problem and you want to find a solution, then you need to try different things. And as you said, it might work, it might not. But yeah, it can be frustrating when you're seeing like posts about you shouldn't be giving your child this type of fruit, or you shouldn't be letting them watch this type of thing, or you shouldn't be doing this and you shouldn't be doing that. And it can get quite damning at times. And I think social media can kind of latch onto some of those fears that we can sometimes have. So it is you have to be really mindful of that sort of stuff and what voices you allow in. So we spoke a little bit about the kind of the trajectory you had as a teacher. You kind of changed, so you stayed home for a little while, then you went back to work. What does it look like kind of providing for a family, and how does that kind of understand the different stages that you've gone through? You obviously moved house and you're changing jobs now. Do you and your wife have a certain boundary system, or like a certain system to make sure that the family has always been provided for, not just financially, but emotionally and supported in different ways as well?
No. Short answer, no. I would say we are definitely not a poster family in that regard. I actually found it a little surprising how you mentioned that the love for you and your wife is going to be stronger than the love for either of you and the child. Maybe this is a cultural thing, but I'm tempted to say the US is the opposite, or at least my family, like big family, like my extended family. I feel like that's not the case. And like I said, maybe that is a bit cultural wise, but I would say my wife and I have been together, like I mentioned, 12 years. We've kind of worked out an equilibrium where we just kind of, we figured each other out. We kind of know the limits, and we just kind of stay within there. And I did listen to a couple of your other podcasts, and I don't remember which one it was, but but I did mention a couple times like we should do preemptive, like counseling or something just to work on our relationship. And my wife was like totally not on board with that. Didn't want to do it at all. And probably stigmas about what it means to like need or go do some type of counseling. But yeah, so we're not doing any of that.
I mean, so full disclosure, my wife and I, we did pre-marriage counseling. There was another couple who took a lot of time invested into us. We haven't done anything professional since getting married. I have heard that spoken about a lot, and yeah, there are times I think about it, but we've been through a lot, and there are lots of stuff that when we talk about being intentional within like a marriage, and I think quite early on we had a lot of that, with a lot of like documents and things like, okay, so let's talk about this to make sure we're all on the same page with this. But yeah, like you said, I've been married 6 years now, and you do get to a point where certain things you are just on the same page because because your life has been, it's arrived both of you at the same point, so therefore you're on the same page. Like you don't necessarily need too many things to kind of get you there. So I can understand that, and I can also understand the stigma around kind of a professional insight. But yeah, we haven't actually kind of gone to that extent yet, if we ever will do. But yeah, the reason we said about the kids thing, the one thing that we did speak a lot about when we got married was that we're both from divorced families. So when we were like, we're going to get married, we were really just, so we spoke about it a lot, actually, like why our parents divorced, like what the impact it had on us, the impact it had on the wider family. And we spoke a lot about that. So like, we know that that's just not even on the table. And whilst I'm talking about this and talking about financially providing, I saw something on Reddit a couple of days ago, actually, where someone was asking about becoming a stay-at-home dad. They were asking for advice on the dad subreddit about becoming a stay-at-home dad. And someone had given them advice to say, oh, if you like, basically this person was saying you shouldn't do it because you're going to have to trust your wife to provide for you financially. But if you do it, you should get a written legal document, essentially like a post-nuptial agreement in terms of like financially providing. And because if she were to leave you, you then wouldn't have the career. And this guy was saying that the courts don't side with a father that's chosen to spend time with the kids, whereas they might do with a mother if it does come to divorce, and they can say like, oh, I lost 5 years of career development, this, that, and the other. And this was the first time I'd ever heard that phrase of like a post-nuptial agreement. Like I'd never heard of that. Like it was never a question that came up when we decided for me to be a stay-at-home dad. So that's why, like, I think that's kind of been cycling around my head as well. So that's why I'm curious about your kind of situation where you've been able to have a little bit of flexibility. Let's say like not everyone can choose to kind of spend 5 months looking after their kid, and then when they move to kind of have a little bit of flexibility to like, let's get the house settled, then I can start looking. Unfortunately, not every family does have that luxury. So you must have some degree of financial stability from that perspective.
Yeah. So I mentioned my wife's a medical doctor. So if anyone's not familiar, they make a lot of money in the US. So we are very privileged. My daughter is also very privileged in that sense, for sure. One thing, I have a friend he's pretty much a divorce lawyer. He does civil law. And so he pretty much does pure divorces. And from his experience, he said that almost all males, fathers, like in these divorces, just want to get out. And it's typically, he probably rarely, if ever, sees, providing female and stay-at-home father. So maybe he hasn't seen that dynamic, but he said to generalize, like men will take bad deals all the time just because they just want to get over with it. And he said women and the women don't, which I think makes sense if you stereotype, because like the flip side of what you just said, it's usually the woman that is staying home and the man that's providing. And so, yeah, the woman has given up a whole career while a man has established a career. And so, yeah, so it is, I mean, I think the person's advice is probably not bad.
That's interesting. And if anyone is listening that is a divorced dad or knows a divorced dad, it's something I'd really like to, I haven't had one on yet. I would like to talk to someone in that situation. it is an interesting world, and I think it's something that's worth talking about. Like it's not this like hidden enemy in the shadows that people shouldn't talk about. It's something that exists, and it's part of our lives. So I wanted to talk about your daughter reading. You mentioned to me that you felt quite proud of her reading early, or you said what reading could be at a 3 or 4 year old. So just tell me a little bit more about that and why you found that such a thing to take such pride in.
Yeah, so a little backstory on me. Growing up, I don't remember my parents ever reading to me. Like maybe they did when I was really young, like too young to ever remember. Growing
Mm.
up, I don't remember very many books around the house. My dad read like some Dan Brown books once or twice. Like occasionally, like my
Mm.
dad would grab a book and like binge it. My mom has maybe never read a book her entire life, like as an
Okay,
adult.
wow.
Growing up, I very much remember struggling in school. I wasn't taught phonics. There was this time period in the U.S. where they gave up on phonics, and so I was
Interesting.
probably going to school like right around that, like in maybe the middle of that age, and
Okay.
so I never learned phonics. And I remember just being super stressed out in school. I would count the paragraphs, when you did the read alouds as a class, like I would count the paragraphs and try and predict which paragraph was
Mm.
mine. And I would read it silently so I wouldn't make any mistakes. So anyways,
Mm.
because of that, I was probably way, way too much of a tiger dad about reading. I started teaching my daughter the ABCs when she could first like speak, like maybe 1 years old. I started doing phonics with her when she was probably about 2.
Mm.
When she was, I don't know the exact age, but probably when she was around 3, um, we were getting ready for bed. And, I read to her every night before bed. I still do. And I was in the other room, like brushing my teeth or washing my face or something. And I heard her in the room and I thought she was just like fake reading. And then as I noticed, she was sounding out words and she wasn't like being completely fluent. And I realized like she was actually reading. That was something that I worked with her a lot on. I tried to always keep it fun. I didn't, I probably forced her a couple times, but I tried not to, I try not to force it.
Yeah.
And yeah, it was like, that was definitely a really rewarding moment as a parent to see your daughter just doing well at something,
Mm.
especially probably like a couple years before most kids even start to learn to read.
Yeah. No, you're preaching to the choir. I'm such a huge believer in early early reader adoption. I was when I was a teacher, I taught like early years, so kind of like I think it's grade 1 in the US. So I taught year 2, where I was like 6 and 7 year olds, and I had a couple of kids in my classes like over the years that I think because of COVID having a bit of a knock on impact, they were not on the spectrum of like on the early reader. Like we couldn't even like assess their reading. They were that far behind, so they needed a lot of intervention, a lot of help just to give them those basic phonics, like the the basic letter sounds and the basic like CVC words like cat, hat, like. And I took such pride in helping those kids, and yeah, it's such a huge thing for me and my kids. We have an inordinate amount of books. If I have one shopping problem, it would be buying books for my sons. um, but yeah, I love it. And my son, my oldest one, he's memorized some books. So like I could get him. I said, "Oh, go and can you read Gruffalo to your younger brother?" And he would get it, and he would do it. He's not reading the words off the page. We've just read that book so many times that he's memorized the whole thing. And he'll be doing the basic like phonics, as I said, like the CV consonant, vowel, consonant words of cat, hat, bat, sit, those sort of easy things. And yeah, when you see them just pick it up and try and do it and start making those sounds, and you can tell that they're really trying, it's so rewarding, and it really does make you feel proud for the time you put in, because you don't have to make it like a lesson. It doesn't have to be boring and like annoying, and letters are everywhere. So like we'll often be like on the train and he'll just be pointing at letters, and then we just talk about what the sounds are. Like it's such an amazing thing, I think, for parents that are interested in it, and it's such a good thing to be doing early on for sure. So I always love talking to people about reading, and we could talk about reading for many a time. I'm not actually the biggest reader myself, but I just see the value so much in kids learning to read early. I think it's so important. I wanted to ask you as well. So, how do you handle things as a parent when your daughter doesn't do what you ask her to do? So, talking about obedience and listening, following instructions, those sorts of things. How do you handle those situations?
So I probably handle it like most people. In and by and I think our default parenting is our parents, and
Hmm.
that's very frightening to some people. And if that's
Hmm.
something that frightens you, then that's something you need to consciously work on to so
Hmm.
that you're not just doing what your parents did. And so I probably that's something that I'm constantly working on. Trying to be a little more patient, trying not to be as frustrated, just resort to yelling. I think I'm pretty good. Like as far as real yelling, I've maybe yelled at my daughter for real a couple times, and like it's 100% effective. So that's like nice to be able to have that in your back pocket if you really need it.
Yeah.
And same thing, like my some of like when my like when we visit my family, my daughter one time got yelled out by her aunt, and like she just started crying, and my aunt was like super sad or upset about it because
Yeah.
she just yells at her kids. Like that's just how
No.
her kids don't do something, she just yells at them. And so um yes, I do strikes, baseball. I do strikes
Mm.
sometimes. I'll give her 3 strikes because then for me that gives me a little more, gives her time to think about it, gives her time to do the right decision. And of course she learns. She always waits till
Mm.
she almost never does it on strike 1. She waits till strike 2. We do timeouts. I probably need to do more timeouts because when she does go to timeout, she takes it super personal, which kind of tells me that maybe she needs a little more timeout.
Mm.
Um, but this could be like her personality. My wife and I kind of do things differently. My wife is more of the mom that is really nice and easygoing and then kind of will snap type of thing. And
Right.
I'm more like persistently annoying, I guess. But I would say, to generalize, our daughter is pretty good. I mean, compared
Mm.
in public, like other people think I'm such an awesome dad because in public, and this could be her personality as well. I can't take credit for all this, but everyone's just like can't believe like how well she listens. And so I don't know. It's like I like to think that it's because of me, and I can't help but think that I had some impact. But I mean, like if I'm really
Yeah.
thinking critically about it, then I mean, I can't take a whole lot of credit for that. It's probably just her personality.
But I think the personality is formed by so many things, right? Like, especially once they're of an age
Yeah,
of school,
absolutely.
of course.
Well, it's absolutely
But
formed by a lot of things.
yeah, but I think you can. I think you start to see the positivity. I spoke to another chap the other day actually, and he was telling me that part of his reading told him that a kid's inner voice, the way they kind of talk to themselves, is formed so much by what their parents say. So you definitely start to see. At least I see that when I'm like very purposeful about certain words and phrases that I like stop saying and start saying. It's like, oh, this thing isn't working. I'm going to make sure I do this. So like the big one that I'd read about was the way that you praise your child is like the best way to praise a child is to just highlight what they've actually done, as opposed to just saying, "Well done, you did great." Like the best thing is to actually say, "You drew that aeroplane and you gave it 4 wheels." Like apparently the research apparently says that that's the best thing to do, and then you get the conversation going. Or they're struggling to get their shoes on, and then you just say, "You did it." So I do that a lot with my kids, and then even the younger one who's nearly 2, he's constantly just going around the house saying, "I did it," like "I did it," like the simple things like picking up his thing that he threw on the floor. He's like, "I did it." So I think you can take some credit if you want to take the credit. I think you should take the credit. You don't have to if you don't want to, but I think it's important to appreciate the work that you do as a father.
Yeah, there's another one. There was a book called I think it was called Growth Mindset, but there's the studies that say if you tell a kid they're really smart, they don't try as hard. But if you tell
Mm,
them, "Oh wow, you must have worked really hard to do this,"
mm,
and then they end up working harder. So that's one thing that I've definitely done. I never tell my daughter she's smart.
Yeah.
Other people tell her she's smart, and I'm the annoying guy that chimes in. Well, that's because she's practiced a lot, and everything's about. And when she doesn't do something, it's always you need to practice more, and she even
Mm.
knows it. And you can. And this is a kind of a funny story that's related. If you watch your kids play, you can pick up a lot of things. So my daughter loves to play school. When she was in kindergarten, her teacher gave birth and was on maternity leave for a couple months.
Mm.
And I noticed the way my daughter was playing school drastically changed. She had a substitute teacher that was young. That was maybe
Mm.
her first teaching job ever. And I could
Right.
tell by the way she was the way she was playing with her dolls and the way she was playing school, I could tell that her substitute teacher was having a hard time.
Oh, that's
And
interesting.
kind of the
Wow.
same thing. Yeah.
Mm.
You can even see yourself in the way that your kid is playing. This is one thing that maybe teachers are more knowledgeable than your average citizen, but you're constantly you're teaching your kid. Every single thing you do is a lesson
Mm.
to your kid.
Hmm.
All those little things, like you can tell your kid whatever you want. Your kid's learning what you actually do, just to get
Hmm.
back to modeling. And so,
Mm.
yeah, and that's another fun one too. You kind of see some things about yourself in your kid, good and bad,
Yeah,
and then you can kind of maybe
definitely.
work on trying to fix some of the not so good things that you're teaching your kid that you're not really intending to teach them.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think once you have that realization, it's such a rude awakening at times. And from the humorous side of things, the ones that my boys have picked up on is they make a lot of noises when they sit down, they're like oof or like those kind of like dad noises. I'm like, if that's what they're going to pick up from me, like then I'd rather that than the kind of like um, the occasional aggressive grunts if I've done something wrong or if I've dropped something. So I've had to dial things back. I would never like shout at someone else, but I'd often shout at myself. Like if I've made a mistake with something, and I'd often kind of like call myself a bad name. I'd just say like I'm being silly or an idiot or whatever. Like if I'm in the kitchen, and I realized like if they see me do that, they're going to do that for themselves or do it back to me. So I've had to dial that down. That's come down to like a grunt, and now it needs to like change from a grunt to something else because I don't want them like just going around the house grunting all the time if they feel like they've done something incorrect. So we alluded to it earlier as we kind of come towards the end of our time. So you've had a bit of time to think about it. I try to normally spring this on the dads, but you've had a little bit of time because we spoke about it. But if you could think back to James, I guess about 7 years ago, 6.5 years ago, maybe a couple of weeks away from welcoming his daughter into the world, what do you think is the main piece of advice that man needed to hear before becoming a father?
So mine's very specific to our situation. We our daughter went to the ICU because of jaundice, and it
Mm.
was. I can't say this is 100% true, but I'm pretty confident. We had a lactate specialist come and talk to us, and all the nurses were kind of talking about breastfeeding, 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 and so we, I guess, didn't realize the importance of hydration in that moment of a baby first, coming into the
Mm.
world needs fluids.
Mm.
And so our daughter got jaundice and had to go to the ICU a couple days after she was born because my wife and her just weren't, getting the breast milk thing down yet.
Yeah.
And that's something that would have been very easily prevented. I did hear about you and another guest talk about the ICU experience. It is, yeah, it's a pretty crappy experience.
Yeah.
Like you mentioned, you can't stay the night with your kid. You have to leave it
Hmm.
there. The ICU unit that we were at probably had 5 to 10 kids in there, and we went there and spent most of the day with it. Luckily, we had the ability to do that. There
Mm.
were there were babies in there that had been in there for months that we didn't even see a parent
Wow.
in there one time.
Jeez.
And you can't hold your kid. There's like a little plastic gap where you can stick your hand in and like touch the kid's belly through
Wow.
rubber or silicone
Mm.
or something. So we couldn't even feed her. We couldn't hold her. And yeah, it was just really sad. Just being in that room was extremely sad. And
Mm.
for at least for us, easily preventable. We could have prevented it just by giving her some formula while my wife
Right.
and her got down the breastfeeding.
Yeah.
So that's what I would have told myself.
I think that's important for people to hear for sure. Like if it's because I know obviously different hospitals do things a little bit differently in terms of how long they keep the mother and the child. Different. I've spoken to people from all over the world, and it varies so much in terms of how quickly hospitals are looking to get rid of the patient, so to speak, to free up the bed. So I know from our experience, they were quite on it in terms of they wanted to make sure that things were clear. And my second son also went for the ICU for jaundice for that exact same reason, but they caught it when they were still there before either of them had been discharged, my wife or him. So yeah, that is super important for new dads and new mums to realize that it is just like, you also have to wake them up and like just to make sure that they're getting enough. It's an absolutely absurd amount that they need to be feeding. And yeah, it's a tough experience, the ICU experience, and I wouldn't wish it on anyone. And it is really sad to hear that there are people that babies there for months at a time. So yeah, hopefully that your piece of advice can change that experience for one or two dads out there. So I appreciate you sharing.
No, just the stigma about breastfeeding. I'm not sure if it's the same in Europe or even like I know you were in Asia, but in the US, there's a big stigma, and especially on like social media. Moms are really proud about their breastfeeding, maybe rightfully so. But you know what? The data on formula is not bad. Like the kids, like
Yeah.
there's an initial difference. The difference disappears after. I'd have to double check the years, but the difference disappears eventually. Like at 2 or 3, you can't tell the difference between a formula and a breastfed baby. So yeah, I mean, there are benefits. Do it if you can, but if there's any problems or if it doesn't work, like don't worry about abandoning it. There's not any good reason to stick with it as of now.
Yeah, no, definitely agree. And I think where we were in Asia, there was a huge course correction, I guess, because it was very common in Hong Kong for people to decide very early on that they weren't even going to try and breastfeed. That was just there was a very high, at least within certain circles, certain class systems, and there's a lot of the kind of upper class, so to speak. And, a lot of professional mums that would spend a very small amount of time off of work before returning to work. So they would have absolutely zero intention of breastfeeding. So all the public hospitals had huge amounts of materials and posters to encourage it. So there would then be some people that that didn't believe in it, that wanted to do it, and then had struggles doing it, and then felt so guilty because like it's been shoved down your throat so much, and you made to feel guilty about giving your child formula. I mean, we even felt guilty that our son was having formula when he was in the ICU, but like that, it just needed to happen. Like it was just a fact. Like that had to happen. There was no other solution to that problem. The stigma around it is because it just gets course corrected, like, and people go too much the other way. And people don't know where to sit. So most thing, a fed baby is the best type of baby, fed by whatever. It doesn't really matter, I think, at the end of the day, as long as they're getting fed. So yeah, I think that wraps up all I wanted to talk to you. James, it's been awesome getting to chat with you. Thanks so much for taking the time and coming on the Dad Dialogue podcast with us.
All right. Thanks a lot. Appreciate it.
And there we have another Dad Dialogue conversation. Of course, a huge thank you goes out to James for coming on the show, sharing his stories with us. I really appreciated James's candid responses to some of the questions we got into today, some of the discussion points we had. I thought his point about how not every parent feels the same way about parenting is an important thing to think about when we go about our days and interacting with other parents, that some people are coming at it from different places, some people are coming at it from different feelings, and it just kind of made me think about that approach we have towards other parents just a little bit differently. I hope maybe that made you think that as well. Like I said in the episode, I'm sure many of us could relate to James when he was talking about that, looking forward to going back to work when the baby did come, just in terms of that screaming baby phase at times, that just having that peace of mind of that journey towards work that not everyone does get to have, especially when women stay home with the baby. So it was an interesting topic. I'm sure a lot of us can relate to it, and it's important that we approach those things in a mature way and ensure that we are maybe coming up and taking ownership of those feelings and ensuring that the relationships that we are fostering are the best that they can be. So a really interesting conversation, I thought. Hope you enjoyed it. Reminder, daddialogue.co.uk if you'd like to get in touch with the show. You can also find us on Instagram, and I really hope that you enjoyed today's episode, and I hope you have a wonderful day. Hope to talk to you again soon. Goodbye.